Welcome to the Bringing the Human Back to Human Resources podcast. I'm Traci Chernoff, and I've spent my entire professional career in HR. Each week, we'll explore the delicate balance between people and business with the aim to reconnect the two and create meaningful outcomes. Listen in as I share my own experiences, challenge the status quo, and chat with guests from various industries about our mission to bring the human back to human resources. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Bringing the Human Back to Human Resources podcast. Thank you so much for being here for another week. Don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe wherever you're catching this episode. And I really don't want to belabor any further points because I really want to jump in. I'm very excited about not only this topic, but also my guest for this week. So without further ado, let me introduce you to Valerie Cockerell, who was born and raised in France, where she graduated with a degree in business hospitality. She participated in the World Showcase Fellowship Program at Epcot in 1987-88, and after working as an investment advisor for a bank, she eventually joined Disneyland Paris in 1991 as a retail manager and ran multiple merchandise locations in the resort division. She eventually joined the merchandise buying office and oversaw the assortment planning for all resort merchandise locations at Disneyland Paris. Upon moving to Florida in the United States in 1997, Valerie worked as the assortment planning manager at Downtown Disney and Epcot Center, and she eventually moved to merchandise brand management for both Epcot and the Disney Cruise Line. Valerie left the company and started consulting for outside organizations in the retail world. She returned to Disney in 2013 to become a contract facilitator for Disney Institute. She facilitated professional development classes and custom programs in both French and English. She drew from her international management experience in retail and operations to teach Disney's approach to leadership excellence and customer service. Since May 2019, Valerie is a keynote speaker and facilitates workshops with her husband, Dan, and she shares her expertise and methodology in leading teams and delivering outstanding customer service. And with her new book, which will be the primary topic of this week's episode, Manage Like a Mother, Valerie brings a simple to understand and easy to implement take on leadership inspired by a mother's playbook. This is the book. And if you are watching, then obviously when I say this is the book, you'll see it. But also you can see that I really took a lot of notes. I have multiple colors of Post-its flagged on various pages throughout the book. So Valerie, without further ado, welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you, Traci. I appreciate. Thank you for this invitation and this introduction.
Of course. Well, you know, I realize that I've had the opportunity to read your book before maybe some of the listeners, although it is highly possible that many of the listeners have read it so far. But, you know, one of the things that I really found so compelling about your book is that while I think I understood that, especially being a new mother myself, that being a mother and being a leader had these like natural crossovers, your book really kind of calls it out for me. I'm like, oh yeah, actually that, I don't know if that makes me a better leader or a better mother, if they both work in tandem, but it was really kind of cool to have these like moments of reflection where I'm like, oh yeah, that totally makes sense. There are a lot of similarities there.
Yeah, that was the idea for the book. You know, for me, it was really, it was just evident when I started thinking about that idea of managing like a mother. It became so obvious, and the more I started digging into it, and more ideas came up, and eventually I came up with pretty much the skeleton of the book and 21 chapters where I could find similarity. And to be honest with you, I finished writing the book at the end of 22. It was released in October 23. And I'm still, you know, I'm almost thinking maybe there's a Manage Like a Mother 2.0 because I keep adding to it. There's more ideas. And when I go back to it, I think, well, maybe I should have added this, or I should have expanded on this idea. So it keeps on evolving in my head, you know. Right. So there may be a sequel to it.
I love that. And if there is a sequel, then please join us again, and we'll get you back on the podcast, and we'll break down more of those takeaways too. Then I'm sure that even as I was reading, I was thinking about all of the other points and things that kind of come up in everyday life. And I'm sure for you now as being a parent to kids who are probably, you know, going on and maybe becoming parents of their own, there are going to be so many other reflections for you in that way too. I don't want to presume, but I can only imagine,
No,
at that
absolutely.
point.
Yeah,
That's amazing.
absolutely. And I, I share in the book, I do a lot of storytelling, which obviously,
Yes.
having worked for Disney for a long time, this is a storytelling company, and I've understand the power of sharing stories and specific examples. So that's why I've incorporated in each chapter. The chapter usually starts with a specific story, something that happened with my kids, and then I extract the insights and the learning from it. And the reason why I do this is because when you tell a story, people connect emotionally, with the
Yeah.
book, and they identify and they can relate. And I'm sure a lot of parents who will read the book will say, oh, something very similar to this happened to me. So now they connect with their own life, with their own experience. And when you can relate to it, you remember it. When you remember it, you can implement the learnings and the insights. And that's the thing. I always tell people when I do a keynote speech, I always say, look, I am not a professional keynote speaker. I am not a professional facilitator. I am an operator at heart. So everything I talk about are from my own experience, whether as a mom or as a professional. And I want to remain very tactical in my approach, because I feel that very often we tend to overcomplicate things. There's a lot of great books that address leadership. There are a lot of keynote speakers that have really sophisticated point of view or experiences, which is great. But then you go home and you think, okay, in the moment, this was great, but what do I do with that? How do I make it? How do I make a difference in my own life as a parent or as a professional? So that's why I try to stay very tactical in my approach and make sure that people have takeaways they can put on and implement, tomorrow, and
Right.
start and improving their approach.
Right. No, I think that actually is one of the things that I noted for myself is, and I do want to mention a couple things that were actually in your forward that stood out to me. But the thing that I think I resonated most with about the structure of your book was actually how you wrote it, because it was leading with the story within your own experience as a parent. And then it allowed us to actually, for me, again, as a new mother, it allowed me to think about what I want to do. And it actually also gave me some ideas for how I want to, or how I could parent in a way that hopefully maximizes the potential of each of my kids in the ways that they need to potentially be guided differently, which is definitely an underpinning or a theme within your book too, is this understanding of everyone needing to be led a little bit differently. And that is the essence of leading people, is that everyone's a little bit different, and not everyone can be led or coached or taught in the same ways. But the things that stood out for me, which actually, if I show you, I have 2 green Post-its here, flags, and then all of the yellow were flags for me as a parent and as someone that really kind of resonated with the concept. And then the red were like the leadership takeaways. And obviously there's inevitably a yellow and then there's a red because of the way that you structure the book, as you've just shared. But in the forward, the first thing was actually your first sentence, which is, there are 2 things mothers tend to worry about and focus on for their children: safety and education. And I was like, what a way to just kind of concisely sum up our jobs as parents. And you continue by saying it should be exactly the same for leaders in any organization. And I was like, that's so true. And I don't know that we often think about what the essence of our jobs is when we are in that job, whether we're leaders, whether we're parents, whether we're both. And I thought that was really helpful to kind of set the stage in that way. And then the second thing that I flagged here was when you continue on by saying that you found that children unwittingly help us write the playbook on leadership, and that so much so that the premise of the book took shape in your mind. And so I thought that was, it definitely, you've kind of already showcased this, but it definitely helped me to think about how similarly to employees, children are very eager to learn and eager to absorb information, and they're observing everything. And this, of course, is another tenet within the book, but it's just, again, I realize I'm kind of going over this a bit, but for the listeners, like, it is, I don't want to say it's that simple, but it actually is so clear. When I read your book, I'm like, yeah, it is that. And it's so easy to overcomplicate what the essence of our jobs as leaders really is. So I do want to ask you some questions actually related to some of these core principles within your book. And for the listeners, just so you know, first of all, obviously, if it's not clear already, I highly recommend you read it. But one of the things that you'll notice throughout the book is that it's basically taking you on the employee life cycle. And so the second chapter is Welcome Aboard, which, of course, for those of us who are closely connected to onboarding, which probably all of us are, we understand that that is one of the starting points for an employee. And one of the things that you talk about here is that onboarding provides a window into the heart of the business. So I'm curious, because you really emphasize your experience at Disney and what that onboarding experience is like, and how intensely engaging it is, and how absolutely it sticks out in your mind as really, it seems to me, being an effective onboarding process. So when you were writing this and you were reflecting on that experience that you had at Disney, and obviously in relation to being a mother, where do you, when you look at that experience, where do you see leaders failing with onboarding, where this is such an important part of, understanding leadership and understanding maximizing employees? Where does this first step in leadership fall short, where people can focus on?
I think when you start in a new job, you're very insecure, right? You're in a new environment. You think you're being judged, you're being evaluated. So when a company creates a great onboarding program, now you feel you are comfortable, you're safe, you're not judged, and that helps propel you and set you up for the future. This is why I said this is, onboarding is a window into how your company invest in people. I've seen everything as a consultant. Listen, and I think I mentioned in the book, there's companies will literally throw you in the middle of the fray and then, sign a couple of papers and welcome and off you go, and then it's all on the job training. Successful organization, and Disney for sure is one of them. They invest a lot in making a first impression. Like they try to, seduce you into the job. I mean, and it works. And when you go through that first day of training, which, by the way, at Disney is the same regardless of who you are in the company. You can come in as a vice president or a frontline employee. You're going to go through the very same first day of training, right? And it's called tradition. And why is it called traditions? Is because they teach you about the history of the company, the legacy of the company, where the company came from, what it does today, and what it aspires to do in the future. And at no point in time in that first day, do they talk about what your job assignment is going to be. However, what they do focus on is making sure that, you realize how valuable you are to the organization, regardless of the level at which you're entering. So when you sit next to a director of the general manager or vice president in that room, you understand what drives a company like this. It's not only having a common purpose, which is at Disney to create those magical experiences for the guest, but it's having a shared purpose, meaning that, the purpose the goal that you have is important for your own well-being in the company and your own success in the company, but also your ability to do your work so that others can be successful, even when it's at the expense of your own success. right? And this is another similarity with mothers. Mothers will invest themselves in educating and raising their kids so they can become the best person they can be, even if at time it goes against their own success. And we live through that with the whole dilemma of work and raising kids. That's that challenge that a lot of mothers and parents in general have to face. So I think this is where the difference is. A lot of companies talk about having vision, having common purpose. This is great. But what about, having a shared purpose where you are willing to invest yourself in an organization, be engaged in an organization, and at times make decisions that go against your own advantage, your own benefit, right? So that's where a company like Disney, that first day, this is what it's all about. It's about making memories. It's about, engaging with the customer, and you do that at all cost. And your common purpose, your shared purpose supersedes your role and your responsibilities. So they often say at Disney, it's okay to be off task if you are on purpose, right? So what does that mean? And at a very simple, basic level, let's say you're a custodian at Disney. You're one of the wonderful folks who clean the park every day. And these folks are the ones who have the most interaction with the guest. Well, sometimes a guest may be lost or they need something. It's okay to stop your job, to take them to wherever they want to be, or to assist them in whichever way you can, which may be off task, but it is on purpose. Does that make sense?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I think it does. And actually, I think this is probably one of the areas where Disney is different from other companies, because there is an emphasis on what the experience is like for the guest. And I can relate to this because I spent almost 4 years working at Target in stores. And so I'm sure you've been to Targets in your time in the US. And, it's very similar. And actually, a lot of people go from Target to Disney because the experience and the values are very similar in terms of what employees prioritize and really what they value. And this does bring me to one of the, again, like very early in the book, one of the points that I flagged, which is that when one employee has different values from the rest of the team, it shows. This is what you wrote. I think it's on page 11 here. It affects the team culture and impacts the recruit's ability to succeed, not to mention the productivity and morale of the rest of the employees. And so when you're talking about purpose, that is so embedded in values for me, because if someone has, a set of values that is misaligned with the purpose of an organization, not saying that they're wrong, they're just different. It is going to be really, really challenging for them to find success, and for them also to find happiness, and vice versa, for the company to feel that that person is a good match. And when you relate this to your experience raising your 3 children, who, by the way, are such fabulous characters. I use this that term very gently, obviously, because they are your children. But it's really like, when you're reading the book and you're hearing or reading these stories, there is this appreciation of the values that you and your husband helped to foster within your children. And that where they, when I think about, relating it back to organizational values, where they kind of like saw through those values and grew up within these values, but then also created a bit of a version of these values within themselves, within the things that they, pursued within their careers or collegiate activities. And so it is a really important and interesting concept, I guess, to kind of dig into, is like values. And I think a lot of the time people sacrifice their values because of needing a job, or they sacrifice their values because they think that they can find other values that matter. But actually, those are things that you're kind of raised with, and you don't really change all that much. Would you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. And on a side note, for the record, when I finished writing the book, I sent the book to my 3 children, who are now 25, 26, and 29. So about 2 years ago, they each got a copy of the manuscript. I said, okay, before it goes out to the publisher, I want you all to read it and make sure you're okay with me sharing the stories, because they're not always, perfect stories. and it's fine. I think we've all dealt with that, but I wanted them to be comfortable with me sharing those very personal stories. So anyway,
Sure.
but I wish when I was raising my kids, it was that clear in my mind of what I was doing. I think much of what we did as parents with my husband was just instinct. We didn't necessarily have conversation. Okay, what are the values? Very often you're in the middle of the fray. You don't even think that at that level.
Sure.
You're trying to think about everyday logistics, and it wasn't always that clear. It's kind of interesting that as you age, this is when you gain so much clarity on what you've done, the mistakes you've made, the things you've done, better than expected, where you failed and where you succeeded. And my own mother, who's 92 years old, lives in France independently. She's a character. Talking about
Wow.
character, she's a character. And I grew up, and I mentioned that in the book, I heard her say, I don't know how many times, I wish I was 20 and I knew what I know now. And I heard that so many times, I roll my eyes every time I heard it. Right? And now I feel exactly the same. I'm like, I wish I was 20 and I knew what I know now. And I had that clarity that gave me, some wisdom in raising my kids, and some structure in raising my kids. I think in a lot of cases I lucked out. I just happened to approach it in the appropriate way. And in some cases, not so much. I mean, as a parent, I look back and I'm like, well, that wasn't the smartest decision I made, or did I say things that I shouldn't have said? Absolutely. Did I fail to set a good example for my kids? Absolutely. It happens. And part of me in the book also wants to remove a little bit of that guilt that especially women, we tend to carry with ourselves. And like I said earlier, that dilemma of I go to work, I'm not spending enough time with my kids, or I'm not doing this for them. And we live in a world where we keep, comparing ourselves to others, and we keep setting the bar super high for ourselves. So I think it's okay sometimes to say, you know what, I did the best I could and the best I knew. And maybe sometime it wasn't ideal, but that's what comes with the job, being a parent, that's what happens. And I think as a leader, again, another similarity, you sometime will look back and reflect back and said, you know what, I could have been better on this one. And that, developing self-awareness and making sure that you have people around you who will give you feedback, will help you identify those blind spots. And it's important to do this because nobody's perfect. We all make mistakes, and that's okay. You need to learn to live with it.
Yeah, it's true. I appreciate you saying that, you wish that you had all of what your mom has shared with you, that if only she knew what she knows today and she was 20 again. And what you shared before, that, these were all things that you didn't necessarily have these reflection points on in the moment. And really, as we know, parenting is an on-the-job experience. There isn't really so much a book that can kind of prepare you. Like, they sort of prepare you, but they can't really prepare you at all. You have maybe some idea of what's to come, but then you have absolutely no idea what's going on. Yeah. And, I think I shared with you, I have identical twin daughters, and they're 10 months this week. And by the time this episode comes out, they'll actually be almost a year old. And, as I was reading this, I was kind of doing this, a bit of ideating and thinking, gosh, what will it be like when they're going through their, terrible twos? And you share a story about your daughter, Margot, having the terrible 2s and 3s and 4s. And I really I actually laughed out loud, because it is something that, as you are a parent, and a lot of my listeners are parents, and, they'll reach out about things that, can be troubling between work and our personal lives, or having to navigate leaves and things like that. But I digress. I was thinking about how when I do have children who are in their 2s or their 3s and their 4s, because obviously they're still babies right now. I was like, well, how will I handle this? Like, will I approach, if one child needs more structure than the other, what will my approach be? Will I be able to remember this point in Valerie's book so that I don't necessarily have to go through the gambit of like, okay, what is it that's creating so much frustration for these little, these little kids that don't have the language to express themselves? And already I was finding myself reflecting on how different they are. I mean, they're identical twins, but they're two totally different human beings. And I was like, I already know which one is going to need more structure than the other. And, then of course, I was pivoting, as your book does, to experiences that I've had as a leader where I could not understand why an employee was so frustrated or so upset. And even though we're talking about adults and they're certainly not children, there is sometimes a lack of ability to express oneself, especially if they haven't yet developed the either executive abilities or the emotional or empathetic, intelligence that they need to have in order to really communicate what they need from their leader. And so I was doing kind of this switching back and forth, and really I was thinking about my kids, I was thinking about employees, and it's just it's a funny thing. And I think that's what really compelled me the most to some of these stories. So, go ahead.
You bring a good point, is when it comes to empathetic, is that how you pronounce it? My French gets
empathetic, but yeah, empathetic. It's your French.
That approach in leadership, there are times where, first of all, in leadership, much like in parenting, I think sometimes women, underestimate their ability to, rely on their instinct. And there are moments where, it's the difference between a problem and a dilemma. The problem has a clear solution, but when you're in leadership and when you're in parenting, sometimes there is not a clear solution. It's a dilemma, and you go with your instinct. And I think we need to be, especially as women, we need to be comfortable relying on this. And then you bring up the point of empathy. You have automatic empathy for your kids. And you're very, forgiving because, obviously they're your children. And you do that even when they do something you totally disagree with. And that's something to remember as a leader, because showing empathy to somebody that who you agree with, you have similar values, you have similar, context, you're in the same environment, that's easy. But showing empathy to somebody who, like you describe, an employee who you can't understand. You're like, why do they feel this way? I don't get it. That's the hard work, right? That's when it's really challenging. And so I always want to make that point. I said, we talk about empathy a lot. Empathy is real easy when you like the person, when you agree with the person, because you feel sorry for them. You can put yourself in their shoes. You don't necessarily, you would not necessarily respond the same way or have the same feeling, but you understand it. And you can, verbally or communicate your support. But when you disagree with the person, and it's even somebody you don't like, now and as a leader, you have to do that sometimes. You have to show empathy to somebody that you have zero chemistry with. And that's a challenge. So that's where, sometimes you can, you really have to do some hard work and put some efforts and be purposeful about those things. And really prepare yourself for this kind of situation. I talk a lot. There's a whole chapter about feedback, which is along the same line. And in the feedback chapter, and I think this is probably one of the chapters that I like the most in the book, because I think when you give feedback to your kids, you are not doing this out of, being strict or wanting to discipline them, or you do this out of love. It's a gift, right? You do this because you want your children to turn out to be the best, well-rounded human being they can be. Well, your approach with feedback in the workplace should be exactly the same. You want the person that you're giving feedback to become the best employee they can be. And I think when you keep that in mind, that giving feedback is not about judging a person or judging a character. It's not a sentence. It's not a life sentence, It's about changing a specific behavior. So just remembering that helps you have a totally different approach to feedback. I'm here to make them a better person. And you can share that with them. And I think it makes it easier to give the feedback. It makes it easier to receive the feedback. I got great expectations for you, and I think you can meet them, and I'm going to help you do that. This is an entirely different scenario than saying, Traci, you late all the time, and this is not acceptable, right? And first of all, when you say you're late all the time, this is kind of, a permanent thing, and it's not specific. There's no data to support any of this, and that's very judgmental. And that's not the idea. Why give the feedback if you're just going to make the person feel worse? Feedback is about coaching and making them better, So this is an area where I think women have that in them, and they practice it with their own children. Now take that, extract it, and apply that to the workplace.
Yeah, I love that. This was a really good chapter. I was flipping through to find my notes on this. And I really love also the emphasis on coaching, because that is a really specific way of giving feedback too, is that it's exactly what the word describes. It's that you're coaching someone. It's not that you're yelling. It's not that you are diminishing. You're really coaching. And when we think about the essence of a coach, it's someone who is really designed to get the most out of someone's potential, find the person's potential, and get the most out of their performance to meet their potential. And, I know you and your family, based on what you wrote in your book, are very, very connected to sports. And for those of us, I feel the same way. I love sports. And for those of us who've played sports or who have seen our loved ones play sports, good coaches are phenomenal. And coaches that maybe are a little lackluster don't help us get to that next place. Not to say that you need someone to always reach your potential. Certainly we can achieve success on our own. Coaches are really, I think, when they're amazing, they do an incredible job of helping us to see what's more and where there is more potential for us, and not in such a limiting way, which can sometimes happen when we are working within our own individualized bubble. And this does bring me back to actually one of my favorite stories in the book, which was a little bit earlier on. I think it was in the third or fourth chapter, sixth chapter, because I said so. And it was the story about how you were working at the French Pavilion in Epcot. And I think you wrote that you were only with Disney for about 2 weeks at this point. And the idea was to be courteous, or not the idea, but the standard was to be courteous and use the magic words and use magic words. And you shared, okay, that's basically my interpretation, is that you're saying like, please, thank you, and goodbye. And you're being like friendly and kind to people. And you, at that time, a member of the leadership team, I believe, because I'm, kind of summarizing based on my notes here, came to the store, and a family of guests were in the store, and this leader greeted them and then was asking them about their trip, where they were from, whether they'd ever been to France, that she was kneeling to address the children at eye level, and that she then, basically sent them on their way and said, have a magical day. And that you specifically watched the interaction. And I'm going to read specifically here verbatim. It became clear to me that the guest experience at the French Pavilion centered around meeting French citizens and learning a little bit about French culture along the way. More importantly, the quality of their experience depended on our ability to make them feel special. To me, this leader demonstrated what the interaction should look like and feel like. It was Disney's courtesy in action. Watching her made a lasting impression on me. It painted a vivid picture of the level of service I was supposed to provide. And I was like, oh, that's exactly right. Like, not only did this really kind of underpin that chapter. I think it's chapter 9 on feedback, but it also really paints the picture of how we as leaders can demonstrate. We don't have to use words. We can just demonstrate the behavior that we want to see from our employees. And it really, I really was like one of my favorite stories because it does kind of also take me back to my Target days and my retail days where so much of our coaching strategy was through demonstration. And you kind of continue in the following chapters by sharing how your children observed you and what their takeaways were, when they did observe something of you. And so I think that's a really important tenet to leadership.
Yeah. And we underestimate this. We pay way too much attention to the words and not enough to the actions. And especially kids, they may be just, playing around you as you interact with people. They may look like they're not paying attention, but let me tell you, they are watching, they're remembering things, and they will serve them back to you. And one of the examples I share in the book is when my kids started driving, and I told them, I said, do not text and do not get on your phone while you're driving. And our youngest son, Tristan, called me out on it. And he said, Mom, I've seen you do this. So here's little Tristan at the back of the minivan had been paying attention all along when I'm thinking, he's a space cadet. He's not going to remember any of this. Well, let me tell you, 6-7 years later, he served it back to me. And he said, Mom, I've seen you look at your phone when you're driving. And I said, well, I do that when I'm at the traffic light or the car is idle. And I'm like, I know I have zero credibility at this point. Right. And all this time, because he was the youngest and, I assume sitting at the back of the car, he wasn't paying attention. Well, you bet he was. Wow. And he remembered it.
Right.
So,
and he told you.
Yes. And as leaders, it's the same thing. You may not think people are seeing what you do, but, and I think, again, that's something I mentioned in the book. It's like people will say, I have an open door policy. But they're never in their office. They're always in meetings or somewhere else. And they're not approachable or accessible. So it's one thing to say, I have an open door policy. But when you're a frontline employee, it takes a lot of guts or courage to go and knock on the door of a leader and say, excuse me, can I have 10 minutes of your time? So, you have to go beyond being approachable and accessible. You have to go and take the first step. But you have a lot of leaders, and I'm sure you can think of a bunch, and I can think of a bunch of people I've interacted with who they talk the talk, and they make it sound fabulous. But when it comes to action, they don't walk the talk, and we see that too often.
It's really true. It's even as something as simple as, I want you to have really good work-life balance. And then the leader never takes PTO. What are you saying? Because you're not actually demonstrating that it's A, possible to take PTO and B, important to you. Yeah. Because if it were actually important to you and something you wanted to prioritize, which leader A, you're saying you want me to prioritize, then you would actually take it as well. So I think it's a very real example and something that I think that leaders probably think similarly to the story that you just shared about your son Tristan, is that, they're probably thinking that no one's looking, that, there's so much going on. It's so busy. No one's paying attention, but people are watching and they see what is acceptable and what's not. And we see this all the time in, unfortunately, like toxic work environments where certain behaviors are awarded or allowed and tolerated. And even if things are happening in the background to mitigate those things, unless something, if someone does something inappropriate in a meeting, unless someone calls it out kind of publicly, it's therefore seen as tolerated by all of the leaders that are present. So I think it's super realistic. And there's the chapter in the book that talks about listening with both ears. Am I right in that? And that there's that story about the gymnastics coach who basically just, leveraging kind of casual conversation and not really making it so formal or so, I don't want to use the word intense, but sometimes those conversations just that we make formal can be intense for employees, or to your point, frontline employees. And because she took a more daily or casual approach to open conversation and listening, it was then shared by her gymnast, Kyla, if I'm recalling correctly, that she was one of the victims of Larry Nassar. And that is a really, really important example of where listening can just take a leader so far.
Yeah.
That it's not necessarily about what you say, but what you hear.
Yeah. And this is a great TED Talk, by the way. And I think this is also, building a routine as a leader or as a parent, especially when you have teenagers, where you periodically engage with people for no reason at all. No reason, no agenda, no nothing. And the problem we have as leaders is those small and short interactions that you may have every day with people, which actually, in the case, there's more and more hybrid work and remote work. So we're taking this out of the equation, which is an entirely different conversation. We're not going to open that can of worms today, but those little interactions at the water cooler, at the coffee machine, that kind of thing, being engaging and open and accessible and approachable. These are not tied to a KPI, right? There's no direct financial impact, or so you think, right? But this is you're going to come across somebody 5 times, 10 times, 15 times, and it's just going to be a casual little conversation until something that is a real gem of information comes your way. And or you provide a small comment or word of appreciation for somebody who's having a real crappy time in their personal life, and that little word of appreciation is going to pull them out of the hole, and they're going to say, you know what, I matter, and I know I matter because my leader took the time to tell me that one thing. And it's going to be that one time out of 15 out of 20 that for you may not even be something that you pay much attention to, but it's going to make a real difference in somebody else's life. So this is that ability to be approachable. And when you have teenagers, let me tell you, there's going to be every day where most of the time you're going to talk to your teenage son or daughter and you're going to get a one-word answer. And that's it. And it's going to go on like this for months until one day your teenager comes up and says, Mom, can I ask you something? And boom, they drop a bomb on you. It's just this heavy question and something that has been in the back of their head for a while, and they never had they kind of took the courage suddenly to address it. But you have to show up. You have to show up the first time, the second time, the 10th time, the 20th time. And then that moment will happen, I promise you. And I've experienced that. And I've experienced that as a mom. I've experienced that as a leader.
Right. Well, Valerie, thank you so much. I mean, there are such invaluable lessons here as a parent or for parents, as a leader for leaders. And I really mean it when I say I think I learned a lot about some of the things that I want to think about and that I want to even talk to my husband about when it comes to being, co-parents in this life, and really thinking about what rearing children really looks like, because it is something that has to be so intentional. And the same with leadership. I've obviously, in the same breath, have taken a lot away. That's one of the missions of your book, is that, you hope people really think about their leadership and what they can be doing to, drive forward maybe their own experiences and careers. So thank you so much. And for all of the listeners out there, I'll have everything linked in the show notes, but would you like to share a little bit about where they can hopefully purchase the book, take a read, or even connect with you further?
Yeah, I think the book is on Amazon, Barnes & Nobles, all the usual places. And it's now published in English, in Portuguese, and just recently in Chinese. So I'm excited about that.
Wow. Yeah. That's amazing. Congratulations. Yeah,
we're working on the Spanish version, so hopefully that will come out soon. No word of a French version, you would think.
I was going to ask. I know you might have to write it all in French, and then you can get to 2.0.
And I have an audio book that's in the work and should be here before the end of the year. So.
Fabulous. Well, I wish you continued success as a mother and a leader. And when you do write Manage Like a Mother 2.0, let me know and we'll have you back on.
All right. Wonderful. Thank you, Traci.
Thank you.
Hey, just before you go, don't forget to subscribe to this show so that you are the first to hear when an episode drops each week. And maybe leave a 5-star review and a comment about how much you loved this episode. Plus, if you have someone in mind who would really enjoy this episode, make sure you share it with them. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I will see you next week.